So we're going to pick up right where we left off on the last video. We were able to successfully install LXD containers, Linux containers, on Ubuntu 20.04. The default Linux install that the Windows subsystem for Linux puts on your machine with that WSL -- install command. You can see that by lsb_release -- all. You can see we're on 20.04. And you can see that we actually do have LXD on our system with sudo lxc, which is what all the commands use, and ls for list, and our password. And it'll show us glad Liger stopped. Now the second time we run it, it's actually running, but it has no IP assigned. That's a big issue. This thing is useless without an IP assigned. We could log into it. I'll show you. So sudo lxc exec against glad Liger. The command switch user login Ubuntu. I wish there was a shorter command for that, but there's not. So we log into it. You can tell we're logged into it because our command prompt changes from being at the host name of my parent Windows machine to the host name that was automatically assigned when we created this container. And we can sudo apt update. Now without an IP, this isn't going to work. Hey, yep, failed to download. See that? It did some stuff, but then it failed to download. And certainly a sudo apt upgrade would not work either. It's a problem. We need the network connectivity. Now we had the network connectivity when we set this up using the trick that I used to get LXD installed on 20.04, which is to install it on 18.04, which we had unregistered after it was successfully installed on 20.04. It's time to undo that, to put 18.04 back and see if 20.04 can get an IP under LXD. All right, so exit again, and we want PowerShell. Again, I'll use the old-fashioned PowerShell just because that blue background really reminds you that we're working from Windows here, the Windows API, as if the :// weren't enough to tell you. We can do such thing as WSL-list to see what is installed, just the default that got put on there, which happens to be 20.04. We can also do WSL list online, and these are the ones that are available. We can highlight 18.04, hit enter, and then we can do WSL -- install -- distribution, paste, enter. It's now installing 18.04. Again, just like the last video, user Ubuntu, password foo, type. All right, so now we can close out of this. We can close out of this even, and we can go back to here, which is going to run our 20.04 by default. Remember, most of the time I default this to full screen with tabs turned off and everything. So function F11 brings back the tabs, and now we have 18.04 as an option. We bring up 18.04, and we can do sudo apt update. Do I make you wait for it? Oh my God, it's such a long thing. I've made you wait through these things enough, and I don't want to edit either. So I'm just going to do LXD init. All right, nah, I didn't like it. Oh, yes, of course, we need systemd. We go into my video notes. We go to these 3 lines that can be executed together. Then we go to this line that has to be executed on its own. I need my pointer back, so we have to apparently hit the escape key coming out of full screen mode. That's new in Windows Terminal. That's probably the kind of thing, me being on the bleeding edge version, has made happen. So I have to restart this terminal. So I can just, instead of closing all the way out, I just close that one and I bring up 18.04 again, and I do PS -O for formatting, com for the column I want, and 1 for the PIP program ID that I want, and I confirm that systemd is there. So now LXD init is going to work. The wizard is going to work. This is without any sudo apt updates or upgrades. I'm just going through the wizard to get back the magic fairy dust that needs to be sprinkled in, so it works on the 20.04 side, right? So when it gets through this without any challenges, right, this is the working wizard. This is the LXD working wizard under 18.04. It doesn't work under 20.04 unless you do that under 18.04 first, as a little recap of the prior video. But now we should be able to sudo ls, first we'll just sudo ls, lxcls to list it, showing it's running, it has no IP. We'll now sudo lxc stop glad liger, and we'll start it. And my theory is that when we list it, it's going to have an IP now. No, it doesn't. All right, so we're going to do a full Windows style reboot of this, and I guess I'd like to demonstrate it like this so that you can see it in context. We have a PowerShell already. I can bring that PowerShell. Oh no, we don't. I must have closed that. It just looks like PowerShell because of that stupid icon. All right, this is how we do a forced full Linux restart. We do WSL shutdown. You'll see both tabs here go to process exited, right? Nothing survives that. Nothing Linux side survives that. And now that it's shut down, we can bring it up again using that. This is the full reboot. That's a Linux startup process that you just saw happen there. Function F11. We don't need 1804. We'll just try it here in 20.04 just as a reminder. LSB underscore release all. So we're in 20.04. Sudo lxc ls. Now, if this doesn't work, yeah, see, stopped. Okay, one more now, and it's running. It still has no IP. All right. So my final theory is that we go into settings and then we change the default from Ubuntu, which is really 2004, to Ubuntu 18.04. So the first time a command, a Windows terminal boots up, it's going to boot to 18.04, which gets its IPs correctly. We should probably double check that it gets its IPs correctly. We can do that by hitting the 18.04, and we don't need to sudo stuff here. It's so much better. There's nothing created here, so lxc launch Ubuntu : we'll do an 18.04. We'll keep 18.04 on 18.04 and 20.04 on 20.04. There's no particular reason you could install 20.04 under 18.04. It's kind of my contingency plan, having the host machine, the first level sub-Linux, the sub-Linux and the sub-sub-Linux. Having the sub-Linux immediately under or side by side with Windows being 18.04 so that I don't run into these problems. It's a gentle magpie. Let's do an ls. And gentle magpie has its IP. Now that gentle magpie has an IP, let's see if we go back to 20.04 and we do another stop and start. Do I still have that? Yeah. Right. Stop glad ligar and start. Still no IP. So we're going to do that forcible restart and give the first taste 18.04. Right, so now when I click this, I hope I did a save from settings. I think I did. Let's be underscore release. I didn't do it. Shoot. Function F11. Settings. 18.04. Save. All right. For good measure. Close all. Force that true reboot of the Linux side. And then bring Linux up again. LSB release all. There we are on 1804. LXC LS. There's our gentle magpie stopped. One more time. There it is started with the IPs assigned. So now function F11 to get our tabs. Start up a 20.04. Sudo LXCLS. There's our glad ligar without an IP. And there it is with an IP. So it is absolutely confirmed, right? So here you saw it. Now it's an IPv6. You don't have an IPv4 there, but that's progress, right? Sudo LXC stop glad ligar. And start. I'm doing LS again. And there it is with a IPv4, right? I'm probably the only person on the whole internet demonstrating this stuff, right? So this is a huge, huge, huge shortcoming of Microsoft. The fact that this stuff isn't easy out of the box with WSL is a big problem. My theory is that Microsoft doesn't want you running containers, not Docker, not LXD, on the Windows subsystem for Linux. They probably think it's redundant. There's already a container system in the form of WSL itself, and they don't want this ziggurat of Linux containers, even though it works perfectly well, because you'll get used to an API that can get you off of Windows, ladies and gentlemen, and my friends, my future proofers. If you want to be future proofed, you need to understand these LXC commands, not these WSL commands under PowerShell. Microsoft wants you understanding the WSL commands under PowerShell. The rest of the world needs to understand the LXC commands under Linux. They're different APIs for managing Linux container images. If you learn to manage Linux container images from Linux, you're on your path to freedom. Systemd does not come with WSL instances fetchable from Microsoft, and you have to do a hack with that distro D thing. Those little commands that I type in from over here, I'm getting those from a site on GitHub, right? So what I'm doing is you can never repeat this too often, right? Because you need to see it. I am searching on distro D, and that first listing at Microsoft from null po head is the way to turn Systemd back on under WSL, right? That's what it's for. This thing was created for exactly the itch I'm trying to scratch. I'm following option 2, make your current distro run Systemd. Those are those 3 commands I execute together. This is the way I activate the service. I enable the service. There's another version of it here, but you don't really need that. I'll explain that later. And then you have to open a new terminal for it to be active. And I don't think Microsoft wants you to do that, because it lets you start to get familiar with a way of working that very easily transitions you off of Windows, right? It's all about the API. So that's enough of the rant. And I'm jumping through a lot of hoops in order to make this magic happen, right? What you see right here It's not very commonly done. It's your way off of Windows. Just rinse and repeat for 2 or 3 years and get the API of LXD/LXC into your muscle memory. LXD, which is the daemon running under the systemd process manager. It's a system manager. If you're familiar with Windows, you know it as the Windows Service Manager. These are Linux services. Systemd is the modern way of managing Linux services. Microsoft turns off the modern way of managing Linux services. They give you the old-fashioned way of doing it, systemv, which I guess you ought to know since I'm giving the complete story here. When you're seeing the word init, what you're seeing is sysv. You're seeing something that dates back, and it's not Unix systemv. Well, it might be. There's System 5 Release 4, which is something a little bit different. But then there's the sysv, which is the initialization system. And that is always there. It's not like Microsoft's going to take this away, but it requires such a high level of expertise to do everything that is, I guess you would call it the equivalent of web development without web development, right? Linux is capable of a lot of stuff by choosing the programming language of your choice, like Python, and then making these Python scripts run as Linux services, Linux daemons, and there's a tremendous amount of power in that. And my theory is Microsoft wants you having a certain amount of power, but not too much power. In fact, they hired the guy who wrote systemd for Linux. He copied the ideas from Apple because Apple made LaunchD, but systemd, we want the Wikipedia page because it has a nifty little picture of the guy who created it, right? So what we're talking about here is Lennart Poettering, a very colorful and controversial person in the Linux community. He's always right, and actually is most of the time. For lack of anything better, his stuff becomes formalized, even though it's copied from Apple. Now, Microsoft hired this guy. He used to work for Redhat. One of the two major lineages of Linux. Remember, there's the Debian split, which is what we're mostly on, and then there's the Redhat split, which came before it, or not, goes back a long time and has a lot of infusion of money. It's kind of like the IBM lineage of Linux, corporate enterprise version. And he worked for them. He worked for Redhat. Now he works for Microsoft. Yet systemd is not in the Windows subsystem for Linux yet. They hired him. It's not there. How long does it take? I just run a script from GitHub to get it. Why can't Microsoft do that? Well, anyway, enough rants. There's the magic fairy dust right there to do it. Findable on GitHub when you search on distro D and choose option 2. And that lets you do all the real power magic, including containers, right? Without systemd, there are no containers. And now containers clearly work better under 18.04 because they work correctly the first time. There's no issue with having to have another version of Ubuntu running in the background to enable the newer version. So I'm probably going to make my sub-Linux into 18.04, and I'm probably going to make my next video about how to just install 18.04, delete the default 2004, and live with 18.04 for a while until this container stuff and systemd stuff gets worked out, because it's more important for you to develop the correct API habits to be free of Windows than it is for you to be on the latest version of Ubuntu. Sorry, that's my view on this. So I've got some other directions I'm going to go here with, like running Jupyter server, Linux side, but the interface on the web browser, Windows side, some really cool stuff coming up. So you stay with me, and I'll see you on the next video. Hope this is not too far out there, this stuff. Let me know in the comments. Thumbs up if you appreciate this video. Refer people to it who need to see this stuff. I'm right on the bleeding edge of, Windows providing you the way to get off Windows. It's a subtle kung fu that's going on here between Microsoft and the users. And no one's going to talk to you about it honestly and show you the kung fu moves but me. I admit, show me someone else on the internet doing this. So talk to you soon, my future proofers.